President Cyril Ramaphosa says carbon intensity is not sustainable and needs substantial investments. Ramaphosa was speaking at the opening of the three-day Climate Resilience Symposium held at the CSIR Convention Centre in Pretoria. The National Treasury Climate Resilience Symposium seeks in part to develop ways through which government can finance the country's just energy transition. The gathering brings together ministers, deputy ministers, senior government officials, academia, the private sector and climate experts. In his address, Ramaphosa said the Global South countries are mostly affected by climate change. In response to global climate change, it has become a common phenomenon for all countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, for more on this story, we cross now to SABC News economics reporter Katlego Legodi. A very good afternoon, Katlego. Of course, you've been in attendance. What are the key themes that are being discussed there?
A very good afternoon to you, Muffuh, and to our viewers at home. Yes, today marking day one of this symposium taking place in Pretoria. And this is where we've seen those role players that you've mentioned there in your intro really being in attendance here. Some of them, as we speak right now, have separated. They've broken into commissions, into plenary session, where we'll see the panel discussions being held around solutions and how then South Africa can move the tide and play its role in ensuring that it's not left behind where this elimination of carbon emissions are concerned. The target here, Nompi, being 2050, whereby they're talking about a zero emissions coming from South Africa. But as we speak right now, there are those structural barriers, financial barriers that speaks to how then some of these consolidated efforts will need to be achieved in terms of South Africa really not being left behind in terms of its efforts where this is concerned. It's all about a talk towards a move to the greener economy, but they're talking about those bottlenecks, the stumbling blocks, and this particular symposium here, seeing the World Bank being here. We've seen the United Nations as well playing a role here. Delegates are coming through, but various of those in the climate sector coming through in terms of just their contribution, in terms of the work that has been done over time. Earlier on, we heard from the Minister of Electricity and Energy, Dr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who was talking about how then he's going to play a role. His department is going to play a role here. We also heard from the Department of Fisheries and Forestry, whereby they came through and told us about efforts that are already underway. Remember, Muffuh, that there's also the Presidential Climate Commission that has been doing the work with the National Treasury in ensuring that they come through with solutions in terms of how then South Africa can move here and not be left behind. I'm going to bring into the conversation to reflect with me on what President Cyril Ramaphosa had said there. Nelson Muffuh coming through here from the United Nations. You're joining us this afternoon just to also look at the role that global players are playing here in terms of where we find ourselves. The talks have been about the economy is moving just in terms of our contributions here and how then everyone can just find themselves in a just transition that leaves no one behind, especially those that are communities linked to energy intensive areas. Welcome to the SABC. Let's start by reflecting really on how important is it that we find these role players gathered here for this symposium, and we'll go into what President Cyril Ramaphosa said there at the podium. Welcome.
No, thank you so much, and good afternoon, and thank you for having me. It is really important, as you also highlighted, that we embrace a whole of society, whole of economy, and a cross-government approach to dealing with such existential challenges, climate change, and also ushering in sustainable development. So everyone has their role to play, and this collaboration is what will be the game changer. You see the presidency coming in, the president with the commitment to really lead this charge. You have the new Minister of Energy and Electricity. You have the department that normally is vested with these matters, and Fisheries and Environment. Then you have Treasury that is really at the heart of ensuring that the right policy and finance mix is brought together to be able to, I talk of not bottlenecks or hurdles, I look at opportunities, because in growing sustainably, embracing a green economy, there are opportunities there to do that in a way that does not leave anyone behind, the just transitions that are necessary. So how do you make sure people are part and parcel of driving this transformation and not suffer from the impacts of taking action on climate change or even climate impacts themselves, which are rising and multiplying as we speak.
We hear President Cyril Ramaphosa saying the situation is somewhat desperate in terms of where we find ourselves, even giving examples of how then various provinces within the country are already feeling and bearing the brunt of this climate change. And he says that there is a need then for consensus in our approach in ensuring that climate financing becomes somewhat of a reality here. And those projects are funded as to change their lives, and South Africa meets its ambitions in terms of its commitments. What do you make of what he was saying there at the podium, and do you get a sense that at least there's been a move here in this consolidated call for everybody to play their role in ensuring that there's climate funding?
Certainly there's movement, but whether that movement is as quick as it needs to be and has all the stakeholders around the table is something that this conference, this symposium is trying to address. The international partners coming and offering their support, the United Nations, this family here offering its support, and the actions that it is going to take to accompany government, the economic sector being here also playing its part, and then government as well as the academic thinkers who are here as well, and people who are activists generally on this matter. So I think the move to get everyone into the same space to talk about it, to find innovative approaches to resolve the bottlenecks, as the word you used earlier, it's certainly having some traction right now. And so that's why we're optimistic. As the President said, and this is something that the UN also has been emphasizing, whilst we move towards tackling climate change as we need to do, whilst we need look at reducing emissions, we should not leave people behind. We need to ensure that the economy is not negatively impacted, that livelihoods also are not impacted from the transition. So what do we do about that? How do we create a financing approach, investment flows that looks after the most impacted communities and stakeholder groupings, women, indigenous people, young people who need, and workers who need support? How do we look at economic sectors that could contribute positively, small and medium-sized enterprises that need support, financing, entrepreneurship development, so that they are part and parcel of the value chain of renewables and the green transition? How do we look at government and the different policymakers, what they need to do to incentivize policies that would, on the one hand, reduce emissions, but also advance early warning systems, build resilience, and actions that will make sure people are protected and safeguarded? And how do we do that? By also bringing in the most polluting sectors, right? And making sure they are also contributing as part and parcel of this effort.
Yeah, I mean, you know very well, even the talks have been that South Africa, you don't find us as largest emitters where that is concerned, but we are just preparing then for the shocks that would come through from other nations in terms of its impacts, for instance, on the agricultural sector and how people have been faring where that is concerned, floods that we've seen taking shape here. But talks have also been around sustainable and a developed kind of financing mechanism and a model that would come through here to ensure that at least then this is not another talk shop. We have the World Bank that is here. We've heard from Business Unity South Africa as well in terms of the role of private business and how then everyone can come through here. Do you get a sense that at least we have those solutions? We have frameworks as well that would come through from various of these government departments that would need financing. So if we are then to look at it in its entirety, do you believe that really when you look at it, when we leave this conference here, we'll be having an idea of who then goes where and what needs to be done, championed, of course, by the National Treasury?
Definitely. We have no other alternative but to have a better sense of who's collaborating and the different roles we all play. We have what is referred to as a transition imperative. And National Treasury has been leading the charge with regards to the financing mix and the policy measures that could help with this, including, for example, the carbon tax that was instituted almost a decade ago. We have Forestries and Environment Department that is leading the charge in trying to ensure there's a new climate change bill that is passed. We have the Presidential Climate Commission that is really focusing on the just energy transition implementation package that needs to also be implemented. You have the international partners, Business Unity South Africa, the UN and others, all coming together to say we need to ensure that we are putting our best foot forward in taking actions that will prevent the loss of lives, prevent negative impacts on livelihoods, prevent negative impact on economic sectors. You talked about agriculture. That is being impacted right now. Now, we heard from the scientific community about the projections, the increased impact of rainfall, particularly on the eastern side of Southern Africa, and leading to more damage in the near future. So the sense is a lot more needs to be done, a lot is being done, and you have the readiness from all the different stakeholders coming together to be able to work together to do that. And South Africa, having the G20 presidency next year, has a responsibility to also mobilize the what is being considered as the heavy emitters, the top 20 advanced economies in the world, to take robust actions, to have new, robust, strengthened, nationally determined contributions, plans of actions that will say, this is how we intend to reduce our emissions by 2050, sector by sector, region by region, right? And make sure that we are really delivering on the financing commitments that developing countries, those who are not responsible for the climate crisis we're facing, access the finance that they need to be able to mitigate, reduce their emissions, but also build their resilience to be able to cope to the negative impacts of climate change.
Nelson, thank you very much, sir, for your time. Let me release Nelson. He's coming through from the United Nations. He's just giving us a sense of how things have fared really from the morning, Nompu, going into the afternoon. And what we're seeing now are those panel discussions, and one of them is on climate financing. That is the buzzword, and everyone here, including the World Bank that addressed us earlier, have been talking about how everyone then should chip in ensuring that there is this innovative financing, sustainable financing, just to ensure that these projects, when they are rolled out, it's a just transition, and that even those communities that really may find themselves with shocks of how then this transition impacts them are not left behind.